Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker, and thank you for watching AHealthcareZ. Today we're going to be discussing profit-driven cost reduction. And I put a question mark there because, of course, all day long we talk about how to lower healthcare costs, and it's in the media all the time. But can that be done through the profit motive? Can that be done through capitalism? Well, in order to examine that, we need to look at some basic economics. So here we have supply and demand curves where you have price on the y-axis and quantity on the x-axis, and then you have an upward sloping supply curve and a downward sloping demand curve. And where those two curves intersect there is referred to as the equilibrium point. And then you get the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. And that's important as it relates to healthcare costs because price times quantity equals revenue for the doctor, the hospital, whomever, and then price times quantity, that same revenue is cost in terms of, let's say, the employer, okay? So let's take that rectangle, and what we want to do is we want to shrink that, right? So we're going to turn it into a circle, and we're going to use a specific example. Let's just say that a particular employer spends $1 million a year on outpatient imaging, MRIs, CT scans, X-ray, etc. And they, in our simplified model, we'll say they get it from 3 different providers: Hospital A, Outpatient Imaging Center B, and Outpatient Imaging Center C. And they spend $500,000 at the hospital. It's $1,000 per scan times 500 scans, get you the $500,000. Then at the imaging centers, it's more cost effective, so it's $500 per scan times 500 scans gets you $250,000 at each of the independent imaging centers. All adds up to $1 million. Great. Now, in order for profit motive, in order for the free market to then lead to lower healthcare costs, then we have to move to this scenario where the overall pie is smaller, right? We've moved it from $1 million, we cut it in half to $500,000. And you can see here that Imaging Center B has gone from $250,000 in revenue to $400,000 in revenue. And then Hospital A has gone from $500,000 just down to $100,000, and then Imaging Center C has gone from $250,000 down to $100,000 as well. So the $400,000 plus the $100,000 plus the $100,000 gives you $500,000 total for this smaller circle. Okay, that's great for the employer. If you're the employer, like, that's fantastic. We've cut our outpatient imaging costs in half. Now, you'll see here that Imaging Center B still charging $500 per scan, but the volume of their scans went way up, right? It went from 500 scans to 800 scans. Okay, so that imaging center basically increased their revenue through increased volume, okay? And that's really what a business is maximizing for. It's maximizing for revenue, it's maximizing per profit. It's not necessarily maximizing for the unit cost. It wants to maximize for overall revenue. And that's the whole, like, Amazon, Walmart model, right? I mean, they have lower prices because what they're really trying to solve for is just a larger overall piece of the consumer pie. Okay, fantastic. And then at Hospital A, you can see that their scans went all the way down from 500 down to 50, and at the Imaging Center C, their scans went from 500 down to 100, right? So what this means is that in order to lower the overall size of the pie, there has to be winners and losers. There has to be winners and losers, right? So in this case, B was the winner through volume. Their volume went way up. And then Hospital A and Imaging Center C, they were the losers. Their volume and their revenue went way down, okay? Now, notice that this is not a hypothetical example. Like, this exists in real life, and it exists in a place called the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, which many of you are familiar with. And how do you know that the Surgery Center of Oklahoma is like Imaging Center B? In other words, they're competing on price and they're winning on volume. Because if you go to the Surgery Center of Oklahoma's website, the very first thing they list there are the prices. They list the prices. And I know an insurance captive that literally has dropped the out-of-pocket costs for their captive members to 0 if they get their surgery done at the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. Likewise, Walmart's very famous for paying the travel expenses, et cetera, when they go to these surgery centers across the country for a very same situation where it's a bundled price, it's a much lower price, and they win on volume. Okay, so what's the practical application of this? Is that can profit-driven healthcare actually reduce cost? In certain situations, yes. And when I say certain situations, what does the Surgery Center of Oklahoma do? What is outpatient imaging? It is elective. So I'm not saying that profit-driven cost reduction is possible in all areas of healthcare. But I am saying in elective services that it absolutely can. And it already has been proven and it already has been shown. And thank you for watching AHealthcareZ.